Hey, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co., and today I'm reviewing Almost Innocent from Colossal Games. And I should really say first impressions more so than a review, because this is a prototype, more specifically a prototype with a limited number of scenarios as far as how far the game actually progresses. This is a Kickstarter. I'll have a link to that in the description down below, and as a prototype, obviously rules, components, all that stuff completely subject to change, but Almost Innocent is a cooperative game of deduction. It's a cooperative game of deduction in which the players are trying to figure out, well, effectively what your alibi is, so that you can prove that you're basically, well, almost innocent. In this game, you're going to be assigned the scene, crime, evidence, victim, or more as the game progresses. Additionally, as you go through this over here, you're going to have the offender as well, and you're going to have evolved rules and additional things that slowly unlock across the course of the scenarios. But in Almost Innocent, the goal is to establish exactly what your alibis are, with the scene, the crime, the evidence, the victim, figuring all of that out as you go through it by asking players questions. You see, in the game, you're going to have these question markers over here, these question markers that allow you to ask specific questions such as what row or how many clues you have in a given row over here, or how many clues you have in a given column. Or as the game progresses, cashing in a different type of token in order to ask whether you have a specific type of clue in a given row or column in the game as you go through this over here. The general idea is you're asking questions. You're asking questions that all the players at the table will answer, and through answering it, they're going to go ahead over to the little handy dandy player aid over here, not really player aid so much as tracking pad, and mark down the answers so they can slowly but surely figure things out by asking questions such as how many clues do you have in this row. If the answer is 2, then you already inherently know that you have 1 of each of these in this row, which means since you have these 2 in this row, you'll be able to mark off all these other ones in those other categories as being no longer relevant. If you follow that up with additional questions such as what column you are in, or specifically asking if you have a specific type of clue in a specific column, that's going to lead you down the pathway to figuring out exactly what you have as you try to establish your innocence or lack thereof. In the game, what you're trying to do is you're going through this process, you're answering questions behind your screen, you're marking things down, you're slowly using up your questions, and that's where the game gives you a bit of a difficulty mode as far as easy, standard, or master, giving you a different amount of clues that you're given, both in terms of the actual investigation markers you're able to use, as well as the innocent tokens you're able to expend when you inevitably find yourself getting something wrong that you can't come back from. And that's basically the core gameplay of Almost Innocent. Establish, what your specific things are, or more specifically, you're actually, technically speaking, you're actually establishing what these are to the player to your right and answering on their behalf as they go ahead and try to figure out, well, you have this many clues in this column, you have that type of clue in that column. And these questions are going to lead you down the pathway towards trying to establish that as you figure all of this out. But then from there, the game has modules and scenarios to keep you invested as the game progresses. You're going to go through iterative scenarios, adding rules, adding extra things to go through as you figure out small adjustments, extra small degrees of gameplay, and or modules mixed in. So for example, over here, we're adding the character modules in with the character abilities, but each scenario will add a different degree of something as you progress through different modules, different abilities, different things about the various guest tokens you can use, different ways to mix up and enhance the experience, such that even though each scenario is inherently replayable, you're also giving the players an incentive as far as why they should continue going and what they should continue adding to keep the game fresh, to keep the puzzle that you're going through fresh as you try to figure out where you are, what your alibis are, what's moving around the board in different ways, what's mixing up the experience for you as you play through Almost Innocent. That's basically the game. There's not a ton going on there. It's basically ask a bunch of questions, get a bunch of answers, and through the process of getting those answers, figure out the deductive process or inductive process. It might be a combination of both. I've never fully gotten those down as you try to establish exactly what your cards are, or well, what your cards are, as well as what the cards are for the players to your right in this game. Which brings us to a review starting off with ease of play. This is an incredibly easy to dive into game. The rulebook is fairly short, fairly simple, and the rulebook has a handful of pages as far as how the actual game plays, and then from there it adds in the modules and the progression, and all of it is fairly easy to understand, although I would recommend diving into the actual base game before reading all the module stuff. Just get a play under your belt and you'll understand a lot more as far as what's going on over here. As far as what I like, don't like, and can see others not liking, this is going to be a fairly short review because the things I like and don't like are both fairly short lists. That's not to take away from the game, they're just short lists. At the end of the day, Almost Innocent is a cooperative deduction game, and it's a cooperative deduction game that does so well. It gives you a bunch of questions. It gives you specifically types of questions you can use. It gives you difficulty modules for adjusting as far as how deductive your group is. How much can you read into not just the actual answers on the table, but figuring out your own clues, such that your own clues will give you a bit of a pathway towards, or specifically figuring out the clues you have that you know for the player to your right will give you a bit of a pathway as far as the types of guesses you can ask at the table that are more likely to result in positive answers for others, which can really help as you go through that. But additionally, trying to read into what the other players guessed and how efficient their guesses were. There are multiple chains of just how efficient you can be through this guesswork process, and this difficulty mode gives you a way to take advantage of that. I would recommend starting off with standard and then from there progressing depending on how well you do or don't do. Easy borders almost on the path of, well, having just too much information. Standard, I find, is a good challenge, and Master is where you're really working together with the other players at the table. And those difficulty modes and the adjustments that those give you all give you a way to tailor the game's difficulty towards you as you go through a fairly simple but fairly direct and fairly rewarding process of asking and answering clever questions in this game. And then there's the modules. The fact that the game evolves and gives you stuff to go through as the scenarios build and as the scenarios develop keeps the game interesting. What starts off as a very simple, very rewarding, but also potentially a little too simple puzzle does evolve as you go through the game, does give you more challenges as you try to figure out what questions to ask and what patterns and what rule set you're trying to mix into the game state and how that mixes up how you perceive the game or how you interact with the game. Again, it's a fairly simple, fairly direct, fairly rewarding cooperative game that evolves with the players at the table. As far as what I don't like, sometimes it does come down, and obviously this depends on, the questions you ask or the difficulty you're playing at, but sometimes when it's time to actually make your predictions, it just comes down to the fact that you've gone through the logical deduction process, you have your answers, and ultimately you know that your victim is one of two cards. You have a victim, and you know your victim is one of two people, and it could be this one, it could be that one. You've managed to pin it down to a question of this or that, and perhaps even other clues rely on that. Sometimes the way this game works out is by the very nature of getting one of these guesses right, you might then narrow down some other clues as you go through a pathway of either or. You know there's one clue in that column, but it could have been this one with this one or that one with this one, and you just don't necessarily know how those things play out, and it ultimately can come down to the 50-50 guess, and it could happen a few times in the guesswork process as you just have to make the best guess and hope for the best. And that can be frustrating. It feels less rewarding when you win that, and it feels, well, just annoyingly punishing when you don't as you go through the process of trying to do the best with the information you have. But sometimes it just comes down to those final guesses. At the end of the day, this is a deduction game, and deduction games do have that problem where sometimes it just comes down to do you or don't you have the information. You've played the best game you have, you played the best game you could, and it just comes down to the information that you had access to throughout the course of the puzzle. As far as I can see others not liking, this is just deduction. It's a pure deduction game with a bunch of questions being asked. And if you can't read past I would phrase it this way. If you are playing with players of unequal skill level who can't really read into the process of deduction past the pure answer at the table, then that's going to be a frustrating experience because the difficulties will not suit the different players. You'll have some players at the table who are reading into the deduction, who are processing, well, it's more than just the fact that there's two in this row. If there's two in this row and there's one in this row, well, the only pairing that combines those things is this and this. Also, I know that I have to have one of the yellows, and this yellow are taken out, so inherently I know my yellows in this row, so that might save and adjust the types of questions that I ask. There's a lot of information in this game that goes past the pure aspect of, well, there's one thing here, there's two things here. Sometimes you have to read into it a bit more, not just with your own cards, but with the types of clues that were given, with the types of guesses that could have or should have been asked by the players, with the reasoning of that spreads well past a simple, well, there's one here and two here, but more into the types and the knowledge of the types of questions you can use to pin those things down, as well as the types of information you can pull from the questions already asked. There are different levels of skill that can be applied to get towards the answer, and while the game itself accounts for that, if the players at the table are dealing with an unequal level of deduction, then one player, the master mode, might be plenty for them to get where they need to be, versus another player, easy might barely cut it. And so that difference in skill level, the game doesn't really have a great way to adjust around that. You do have the aspect that a player asking better questions can help all the players at the table, but at the end of the day, once you're past the questions, the answers you have might be problematic for one player and super easy for another, and the game doesn't have a great way around that. As far as final thoughts on Almost Innocent, this is a fun game. I enjoy this one. This is a cooperative deduction game in which you're trying to figure out, well, what the answer is while working together across the board. The trick for the most part, the game itself for the most part, is a one-trick pony of asking questions and getting answers, but it stops itself from being a one-trick pony through the evolving nature of the gameplay, through the modules, through the scenarios that escalate with you, and so it gives more to it as otherwise a very simple one-trick pony game. Almost Innocent is fun and engaging and rewarding, but it's also caps out exactly where it can be. As a cooperative deduction puzzle that does have a degree of reliance on the other players, it does have, it's still a one-trick pony. It's just a one-trick pony with more adjustments or nuances to that one trick, which keeps it interesting as it develops, but also caps out where this game can be for me. For me, this one's a 3.5 out of 5. I enjoy the puzzle, I enjoy the cooperation, I enjoy the deduction that the game gives me, but it does mostly come down to, at the end of the day, to asking a bunch of questions, getting a bunch of answers, with some degree of fluff mixed in to mix up the experience and to have the experience grow with you. As far as other game recommendations, first of all, if you're looking for another cooperative deduction game, Paint the Roses will scratch that itch for you. Paint the Roses is going to give you a similar degree of trying to deduce things together with the other players as you work together in the same puzzle with the same goals by asking questions and hoping to arrive at answers that the players can work out together. And if you're looking for something that gives you a deduction that perhaps a little bit more rewarding but also competitive, so a different experience, Search for Planet X remains one of the better deduction games that I've played. Thoroughly enjoyable game from I'm not even sure, from Renegade Games, that gives you an app and deduction and a whole lot of, you don't need to play with the app, you need to play with the app, as you go through the game trying to figure out exactly where Planet X is and figuring it out better and faster than the other players. In any case, and until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. I hope you found this video helpful, and as always, I hope you have a good one.